What's up, guys? So I'm working on this CRX for a buddy of mine, and I figured I'd tell you a story in the meantime. Story about my CRX. Let's go. So it was the late 90s, early 2000s, and all my buddies that I had grown up skating with had kind of transitioned into cars, myself as well, obviously. And I had a Honda Accord at the time, loved that thing, had it freaking hammered to the ground, got stuck everywhere. It was pretty fun. But I'd always wanted a CRX, so I decided to sell the Accord and buy a CRX. So I started looking around, and at the time, Auto Trader was a legitimate thing, that was like an actual magazine that you went to the Circle K and looked at every Tuesday morning when they came out. Started looking around, ended up finding one in somewhere in North Phoenix, some ghetto small little used car lot, but ended up buying it. Worked out great. So I drove the CRX for a while, totally loved it, totally enjoyed it. Ended up saving up some money, getting it lowered. Finally found some wheels for it, did that. Then some good friends of mine, same ones I grew up skating with, convinced me to start autocrossing it. Actually did pretty well. Ended up placing third, I think, for my first season overall. Pretty cool. Actually, who am I kidding? It was the best time of my life. Maybe not the best time of my life, but as a kid, what's better than being a friggin' race car driver, right? So here's a picture of the race results from back then. You can also see my buddy Mark down below. Thank God for Mark, because shortly after that, I decided to blow my motor up. When you're 19, you drive anyhow. So I blew the motor up. Fortunately, Mark was actually swapping his motor, putting a bigger motor in it, and was nice enough to give me his. So Mark sold me, gave me his motor, whatever, and my other buddy and I decided to do the motor swap ourselves. No big deal, old Honda, shouldn't be very difficult. However, we didn't have any power tools, we didn't have any jacks, we didn't have any jack stands, and we were doing it in the street. We obviously didn't have any brains either, but what can you do? You're, 19. No offense to any 19-year-olds who are smarter than me, just saying. So we got about halfway through it, did pretty good, but we just didn't have the facilities to do it, didn't have the tools to do it, it wasn't gonna work. At the time, there was a import tuner, best one in the state as far as I'm concerned, SRD. Big ups SRD back in the day. Dropped the motor off there, well, dropped parts of the motor off there, dropped the car off there, and said, call me when it's done. Up to that point, I'd actually been driving that car with no interior, and I mean nothing. In fact, it kind of looked like this. I had a gauge cluster zip tied to the steering column right here. I had my radio duct taped to the floor here, and I had a big old sub flopping around in the back, right back here. What can you do? It's a race car, right? I don't know who I was hanging out with a little bit later, but I think everybody was driving newer cars, and I wanted to kind of fit in, have something a little bit newer, so I decided to sell it. It sucked, but it felt like the right thing to do at the time. Right. So fast forwarding quite a few years, quite a few cars actually at that point, I decided I wanted another CRX, but had to be the same year. Had to be an 88. The 88 to 91s are all technically the same body style. The 88s have some very specific things, and that's what I had, and that's what I wanted. So I looked and looked and looked and looked and looked, and it was turning out to be very difficult to find another 88. Even ended up driving to Lancaster, I think it was, with my best friend Joe. No offense to Lancaster either, but man was that place weird. It was like a straight up ghost town. Everything was nice and new and boarded up. Very strange. Anyhow, went out there to look at one. It ended up being a total roach, but it was a super fun trip. Actually scored some wheels from the guy while I was there. Let's see if I can find a picture of them. So those are those wheels, they were cool. Came back, kept looking, ended up finding one. Went out to this guy's house, then went to his mom's house because apparently it had been sitting in her garage for 8 years. And when we first got there, we didn't even think the car was there. He didn't even think the car was there. She had stacked so many boxes up and around this thing all the way to the ceiling that you literally couldn't even see the car. It took us like 30 minutes just to unbox everything to roll the car out. It was pretty beat up, but it was so cheap that it was worth just picking it up and seeing what I could do. Got it home, looked at it for a while, detrimmed it. It was trashed. It was too much work for what I wanted. Fortunately, one of my brothers had gotten into Hondas with me and ended up selling it to him. Gave him something to putz around with and play with and work on just for fun. So I went on the search again. So after a while of continuing to look, I gave up. An 88 just wasn't gonna happen. Found a decent 91 for a decent price. And while it wasn't exactly what I wanted, it was clean enough, had a bigger motor in it, and it was turboed. Why the heck not? Let's do it. So I bought that, drove it for a while, tried to get it to pass emissions, and they literally wouldn't let me on the rollers because the turbo setup on it was, anyhow, it doesn't matter. The thing wouldn't fit on the rollers. So I pulled the turbo off, put air conditioning back in it because it's Arizona and you gotta have air conditioning. Cleaned it up the best I could, enjoyed it for a while. My brother and I had decided to kind of look for some parts cars at that point, just to have something to pull nice pieces off of and start kind of collecting stuff up. And my brother Dave actually found a good candidate, so we went out and looked at it. And we're walking around this thing, and I walked around to the back, and I noticed the exhaust. Sounds kind of silly, it's just an exhaust, right? Even an aftermarket one, they all kind of look the same. But this one, the tip of it was shaped strangely enough that it triggered something. I was like, wait a second. No. Okay. Let's look for some very specific things on this car and see what I can find. And I just kept finding them. This was right. That was right. This was right. That was right. And I looked at my brother, I'm like, dude, I think this is my car. Like my original car, like my original 88. So we hung out with the family, super cool family. They ended up feeding us lunch, we hung out all day. Bought it, paid a little bit more than I should have for it, but knowing that it was probably my car, it was worth a couple extra $100 for nostalgia, for sure. So we get this thing home, take it apart as well. Honestly, it's pretty trashed also, but it's my car, I think. Did some homework, sure enough, it's my car. Same VIN number, same everything. So here's what it looked like beforehand, and here's what it looks like when I got it back. Yeah, pretty trashed. But it's my car, what do you do? Gotta have it. Problems, buddy? So I don't remember all the details, but I decided that mine, my original one, was also too beat up. It was just, it needed too much work for what I wanted. Now the plan was to build a super clean daily driver. I'm not trying to build a race car, I'm not trying to make it stupid fast, I just want it to be super reliable, super clean, super fun to drive. So I sold that one to my brother Dave. So he now owned that one and the first 88 that we had found. I sold my 91 to another friend of mine, went back on the hunt for an 88, and after a while my brother was like, dude, you're dumb. You're willing to drive to LA, make all these trips all over the place looking for an 88. Dude, yours is in the garage. Your original car is sitting in the garage, buy it back from me and build the dang thing. He was right. So that's what I did. So it was weird, even with my enthusiasm and the story behind this car, I couldn't get anybody on board with me. I worked at a body shop at the time, had a good relationship with everybody, and it took me 6 months just to get somebody to put a core support in this thing for me. For those of you who don't know what a core support is, let me show you. So this area here that literally supports the radiator support, core support, same thing. I needed one of these installed. Pretty straightforward job, only takes a couple hours, especially for somebody who knows what they're doing. But literally, it took 6 months to get somebody to do it. Finally got it done, all was well, but I couldn't get anybody else to do the body work on this thing. I would love to do it myself. I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to body work. I can do some basic stuff, but this thing needed to be super straight and super clean. I guess the thinking was, nobody's stupid enough to spend that kind of time and money on a car that's worth like 500 bucks. I'm stupid enough, but I couldn't convince anybody. After a while, one of the other techs there at the shop came up to me and he's like, how come you haven't asked me, man? And I guess I just hadn't thought about it. I highly respect this guy's work, one of the best guys there. But I didn't think it would be something he would be interested in. And so I was like, well, okay, are you down? He's like, yeah, absolutely, drop it off this weekend. Well, okay then. So off it went. It actually spent a month at his house. He took the thing all the way down to bare metal, did all the body work, did a couple of custom things that I wanted. I'm not trying to make a custom car, but I wanted to clean up some lines. So I had him remove the antenna and the rear window washer from the roof. Just a little bit cleaner. So after all the body work was done, it was time for primer and prep for paint. Spent a little bit of time there, making sure everything was perfectly straight. Then it was time for paint. Paint, oh my God, I hadn't been that excited forever. To be at this point after all this time with my original car and knowing that it was gonna be just this beautiful dark black thing. Oh, side note there. Honda's never made a straight black car, at least at that point. Everything had metallic in it. I wanted to be a little bit different, but still pay homage to the original style of that car. So I just went with a jet black. Also makes it easier to paint pieces later versus color matching and things like that. So it was ready for paint. It was in the booth. It was time. The first coat of base went on, and I couldn't believe it. Then the clear went on, and it looked like glass. The thing was awesome. Especially when we first rolled it in the sunlight the first time. Yep, no words at all. So then reassembly began, and that part's a blast too. Every nut and bolt and washer and wire and bracket and carpet and dash and steering wheel, everything I could find new, I did. Everything that wasn't available, I restored myself to the best of my ability, cleaned up, polished, painted, whatever needed to be done. So there's really only a couple things left to do at that point, one of which is wheels. Now wheels, for me at least, need to be fairly period specific. No Fast and the Furious here for me. No offense to Fast and Furious, it shaped a lot of our culture and destroyed some of it. But I ended up finding a really cool set of gab wheels from a buddy of mine. Love that wheel. Still actually have them. But a little while later I found a set of work wheels that I like even more. Then it was time to decide on suspension. Ended up going with this setup. Very, very happy with that so far, I must say. Finished the stereo install and did some of the vinyl details. So speaking of final details, I figured I'd end this video here. I'm actually at the Mazda dealer. This is the Mazda dealer that I worked at when I sold this thing the first time around. It's also been a couple of weeks if you hadn't noticed. You know, life gets in the way. But final details were done. It was at the point where I just got to enjoy it. I get to drive it, stop at people's houses, show it off, talk to anybody who would listen to me talk about it, and just enjoy it. It's been a ton of fun. You'll notice I'm back on the gab wheels. Had a little issue with my work wheels and I ended up breaking a valve stem. Anyhow, but I wanted to thank everybody who's involved in this project, specifically my brother Dave, for not only finding the car, but being involved with me. It's just been a ton of fun. You know, if you're a serious car person, there's always that one that, God, I wish I had that thing back. I got it back. So thank you very much for joining me in this story. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know. Give me a thumbs up, give me a subscribe, a bell, a comment. Totally appreciate it. See you in the next video. Peace.